My name is Milton Schoen, and welcome to America Salutes. Today we have Al Zdon, who is the Communication Director for the Minnesota American Legion. He's the editor of the Minnesota Legionnaire, which is the third largest newspaper in circulation in the state of Minnesota. He is the past editor-in-chief and managing editor of the Hibbing Daily Tribune. He's an author, and he has twice won the award for the best American Legion newspaper nationwide. So welcome to America Salutes.
It's good to be here, Milt.
Yeah. And you have a very busy schedule, and one of the things, as a member of the Legion, also as a county veteran service officer, one of the places I turn to for information is the Legionnaire, because it tends to contain more information about veterans' activities than just about any publication that exists.
Well, yeah, I do. The Legionnaire is about 80% of my job. I especially towards the end of the month, as the deadline approaches, then it becomes my entire job. But yeah, we try to. It's mainly for the American Legion, but it does contain information about all kinds of veterans events. We have a community calendar that includes everything. If you send it in to me, I'll probably get it in. So, you know, any kind of news that we can come across, and we also try to throw in some feature stories about people who have served in the various wars. I'll tell you a little story about the Legionnaire. I took over 17 years ago, and I had been a Legion member before that, and I realized that when I got the Legionnaire at my house, it went directly from the mailbox to the circular file. I never read it. So I knew I had a problem when I took over as editor, that if I wasn't reading it, probably nobody was reading it. And so what do I do to you know, make it a newspaper that will that people will read, you know, so that they'll actually, you know, want to open it up. And that's the hard part for any newspaper, whether it's the Star Tribune or the Minnesota Legionnaire, is to get people to look at it, to open it up, to, you know, see what's inside. So what I decided to do was I thought, well, they're all veterans out there. My readership is, you know, 90,000 American Legion members, and so they're all veterans. And what do they want to read about? They want to read about themselves. They want to read about other veterans who have been in the wars. So I started writing veteran stories, and it kind of started slowly, but after a few years, it seemed to catch on, and now I think people look forward to seeing the veteran stories, and we'll talk about it later, but we have collected them into some books as we went along. But so we try to put you know, my background is you know, a small daily newspaper editor, so I want to bring all these all the things that make a good newspaper into the Legionnaire: feature stories, columns, news. You know, news that it's a monthly, so it's hard to have breaking news, but we try to keep it as up to date as we can.
But you have one of the benefits that newspapers once had, thinking back to more of my youth, where newspapers had space and they covered things in depth.
Right.
And so when there's a renovation of the veterans' homes, or there's some other project, you can devote news space to those issues in a way that our daily newspapers don't have that space available to them.
Right, yeah. Well, the Star Tribune and Pioneer Press do a pretty good job on in-depth. It's where you don't see the depth is in you know, some of the electronic media, and it's just the nature of the media. You know, it's not a criticism. It's just they're fast, they're there, but they don't have, you know, they don't have the time, you know, to go into that kind of depth. And so yeah, just for example, the legislature just completed. We did 2 stories on the end of the legislative session. They took up probably a page and a half of the newspaper, you know. But yeah, we do have that kind of liberty to do that kind of thing, and I enjoy doing it. It's, you know, if people want to read it, if they're interested in what happened in the legislature, if it's something that's going to affect them, and it affects many of our readers, then it's there. They can get at it. It's, you know, and if you don't want to read it, you can move on to the great story about somebody that served in World War II. But yeah.
Well, I'm impressed of the housing development out at Fort Snelling, that you had pictures and in-depth detail about the project, including the public hearing, some of the comments that were made. And by having enough space to devote to these stories, it's not just a thumbnail sketch. You give the reader some detail, and that's a very important aspect because our daily newspapers, we have a general concern, but as you mentioned, you have readers that have a very specific concern, and they want to see more details.
Right, and so, you know, if we can, we do it. You know, there's probably a half a dozen or a dozen major veteran stories that go on during a year, a project like you just mentioned, or the legislative session, or you know, whatever. And so we try to hit them hard when we can hit them. You know, that's what we're there for.
And one of the aspects of your job is, I suspect you put many miles on, and we were discussing earlier the fact that you were at Boys State, and yesterday you were at Girls State, and you are at so many of these functions around our state.
Yeah, American Legion has, you know, a bunch of programs, but I think two of the very best are Boys State and Girls State. For those of you that don't know what they're about, is each program brings in about 350 juniors, high school juniors. And during the course of a week, they will actually create their own legislature. They'll create their own laws. It's a hands-on way to learn democracy. And you know, it's sad, but you know, a lot of kids can get through high school without having any clue about the legislative process, how cities work, how counties work, and it's hard to run a democracy when the electorate doesn't know what's going on or have any idea about the process. And so every year, you know, there's 700 kids that are going through these two programs, and when they come out at the end of that week, they're on fire for this stuff. You know, it's a very intense. It's like a camp. It's like it's just very intense in how they get at it, and they argue, and they elect people, and you know, go through the whole process, and so they're great programs. So yeah, on Sunday I was over at Marshall, SMSU for the Boys State program. I stayed through Monday, and then yesterday I was over at Girls State. I'll be back at Girls State twice more this week to cover it for the newspaper. And one of my other side jobs is I do the annual, the yearbook for both programs. So I have to take pictures for that too. So.
And you are working with future leaders, because these are obviously youth that you know, the desire burns within them once they've been through the program, but oftentimes they step up in their lives.
If you have any doubts about the future of the country, come to Boys State or Girls State and watch these kids interact, especially later in the week when they're moving and grooving on this stuff. It's phenomenal to see how incredibly talented and astute and engaging these kids are, and it does give you a good feeling that, you know, America is in good shape, because we do have some good future leaders coming up. Yeah, they're great kids, and it's just fun to watch.
Very good. And one of the challenges is capturing history. And as we have generations, and when I started as a county veteran service officer, we still had World War I veterans.
Right.
But oftentimes the Legionnaire has articles on, I know there's a group at Fort Snelling that gets together and they share their reminiscences about their time in the service and very specific campaigns of those conflicts. And oftentimes you have articles about their meetings and incidents and individuals' incidences in the service.
You're referring to the Fort Snelling World War II History Roundtable, and it is a great program. Don Patton has been running that for many years. They'll often get 400, 500, 600 people at a meeting. It's starting to trail off now because a lot of the people who used to attend were World War II veterans. And I haven't seen any recent statistics, but I think only about 1 out of 20 World War II veterans are still alive now. That's how many we've lost. But there were 16 million to start, so there's still a few around, and it's getting difficult for them to put on programs, and because they just can't find veterans for a specific battle or a specific action or something like that, which is kind of why I've leaned so hard in when I do these stories to try and find some good stories from the World War II guys, because when they're gone, they're gone, and you know, and many of them are encouraged to, you know, write their memoir, do a tape for their family or something, and those are great ideas. You know, if you have a relative who's a World War II or a Korean or Vietnam, you know, whatever, you know, have them sit down for an hour sometime and tape their reminiscences or write them down, you know, and everybody's you know, got a book in them somewhere, they say, and so because when it's gone, it's gone. And I'll just give you an example. I came home. I had heard, you know, my dad tell a story here and a story there, and I thought, boy, I'd just love to get it all together, you know, and so I brought a tape recorder home and I put it on the kitchen table and popped open a couple of beers. I said, come on, Dad, let's talk about the World War II days. And he looked at the tape recorder and he said, nope, he didn't want to do it. He had no intention of talking into a tape recorder. It just wasn't part of his thing. So I know I've probably done 100 interviews with World War II guys, and I know more about them than I know about what my dad does. I don't know what division he was in, and it's all lost. It's, you know, my brother doesn't know. You know, of course, all the relatives are gone now. So if you don't get it now, you don't get it. You know.
And that generation was not prone to speaking about these activities.
Not until they got older.
Yeah.
And as they got older, and what people ask me is, how do you get them to talk so much? I say, well, the Vietnam guys won't talk at all. The Korean guys, they're starting to talk pretty good. I say, the World War II guys, you put a nickel in them, they're good for all afternoon. You know, yeah. And they just, I think part of it is the pain of being, of the war. War is brutal. It's terrible. It's hard to live through, but after 60, 70 years, well, you remember the good times. You remember the comradeship. You remember the funny things that happened along the way. You remember maybe the heroic thing you did or whatever. So, so it's only the good stories that kind of survive. The bad has been sublimated not for all of them, you know, but for a majority of them.
Right. Well, that's a move into, you're an author of 2 books, War Stories and War Stories Volume 2.
Right.
And those are special books, and they're also publications that individuals can order, and they can also, when they do so, the proceeds go to the American Legion's Children and Youth programs, as I understand it.
Right. Yeah, well, what happened was, I mentioned I was writing these stories for the newspaper, and we had done a number of them, and somebody suggested, gee, why don't you gather them into a book? And I thought, well, I don't know if I want, that sounds like a lot of work. But then at the same time, they were building the World War II Memorial over at the Minnesota Capitol. So I thought, okay, we'll do a book, and we'll do all the proceeds go to the World War II Memorial, and you know, it was the Legion put the money up front to publish the book, and all the proceeds went to the War Memorial. In the end, we raised about $70,000 for the War Memorial, so it was a very successful project. But to me, what the important part of the project is, the stories got preserved. Newspapers, you know, today's newspaper is tomorrow's fish wrap, is the next day's garbage liner, you know, and so newspapers have a very short shelf life. Books tend to hang around a little bit longer, and they tend to be in places like libraries and research centers and things like that, where these stories will live on. So we did the first book, and then, you know, as time goes by, you gather more and more stories, and so somebody said, let's do a second book, and so we did. And so all the proceeds for this one go to those youth programs. Some of them we were mentioning, Boys State, Girls State. The Legion has an oratorical contest. Probably our biggest program in terms of reaching people is the baseball program. It's over 6,000 kids play baseball in Minnesota in the American Legion program, and we have had 4 or 5 or national champions over the years, which is amazing because our season is about, you know, our baseball season in Minnesota is like, you know, 4 days long, it seems like sometimes. So all the money goes to the youth programs, and it's just it's worked out really well. Of course, now people are saying, when you're coming out with volume 3, so I guess, and I actually have enough stories now, so someday.
And you might have a more Korean, Vietnam material.
Right. Yeah, it's gonna. Yeah, these are about 80% World War II, and probably 15 or 10% Korean, 10% Vietnam, and a few in both books. There's some, you know, some of the Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, Iraq stories too. But I'm on a mission to get as many of these World War II guys as I can while they're still around.
And you mentioned generationally there's a difference, that in World War II, basically everybody went. If you were able-bodied, 16 million people, you went into the military. Korea, it was a much smaller subset. Vietnam, slightly larger in terms of number of people having served. And telescope to our recent conflicts, we've got a very narrow range of people who served. So the experiences and their coming back is much different.
It is. The World War II is kind of the classic American experience, because most of these guys and women grew up in the Depression, and so they grew up with not much. As almost every one of them would say, we didn't know we were poor, because everybody was poor. And then bang, they come out of the recession and right into World War II. And then, of course, so many of them went on to be so successful in, you know, they came back, used the GI Bill, became successful in teaching or business or, you know, whatever. And so it was, you know, that they call it the greatest generation. Well, you know, they're at the right place at the right time. The Korean guys think, you know, they call it the Forgotten War, and they have a little chip on their shoulder that people, you know, the Korean War quickly faded into the shadow of World War II, and you know, if you were over there and slogging through the mud, you know, carrying your rifle, the war was a big deal to you. But when you come home, oh, Korean War, you know, what was that, you know? And then we didn't really win the war either, you know. So then Vietnam, you kind of go even a step further. A lot of protest at home, and I never experienced it. I'm a Vietnam vet, you're a Vietnam vet. I never experienced much hate or, you know, when I came home. In fact, I thought people treated me pretty well when I had the uniform on, but other people ran into you know, a lot of you know, stuff that happened to them. But mainly there was this feeling like it was an embarrassing kind of war. We lost. You know, let's get it out of our national conscience as fast as we can. And so the Vietnam vets kind of got left behind. Now I think they're starting to get a little. Yeah.
Well, and to that point, I think when the last prisoner of war came home, that it had been such a searing experience for America people just wanted to put it in the past,
Yeah.
and to the detriment of the veterans who served. But part of how we've responded so well to the veterans of the Persian Gulf conflict and the Iraqi war and the Afghan war is that Vietnam vets that didn't feel that they were treated the way they'd like to be have reached out to make sure that this generation of veterans get connected.
Right. General Shalato, who ran the National Guard for a few years and now runs the state VA, says that all the time. He said the reason, the one big reason that the current war veterans have so many programs, are treated so well, is because of the Vietnam. They didn't want that to happen again.
And I think we've learned the lesson to separate out what you think about the conflict,
Right.
because they don't always remain popular if they drag on,
Yeah.
from the people who are serving the country, and that you need to respect the people that serve the country and their sacrifice and help them if they have needs when they come back.
Exactly. And I think it's, if there's a current veteran that is not being served, it's because something happened that was strange, because the programs are pretty much in place, or they're as good as they've ever been anyway, and they're certainly the best in any nation in the world, I think, the way we treat our veterans today.
And we are fortunate in this state that we have a culture of working together, of not having turf battles. In the end of the day, the object is to help the veteran,
Right.
rather than control our little piece of it.
Right.
And I know from experience in some other parts of the country that that's not true everywhere in this country.
Yeah, and you can. It was fun to see during this legislative session that just concluded, to watch how the veteran service groups work together, because that's sometimes a turf problem too. And but they all worked extremely closely together and created a united voice, especially for this Minneapolis Veterans Home. But it was wonderful to see, because it doesn't always happen, and but it did happen this time, and I think it may have helped get some legislation passed this time around.
Well, the communication piece is important, that there is some unity, and you can demonstrate a need, and they make tough decisions in both St. Paul and Washington about allocating resources, but to say that investing these resources here will make a difference.
Right. So I don't know. You're right, Milt, that I think other states envy Minnesota. Other veterans communities in other states envy Minnesota, because the system does seem to pull together and work very well, and from in a variety of ways.
Well, I'll share a story from one of the conferences I was at, and there were going to be 5 pilot projects in healthcare, and somebody from Florida got up and said, you shouldn't just do that in a place like Minnesota, where it's going to work.
Right.
You ought to try it in a place like Florida, where you figure it might fail.
Right. Yeah.
And I always carry that with me. It was an interesting perspective on how things happen within these United States.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just the veterans community. I was involved for a long time in the education community, and it was the same thing. Things started in Minnesota and then they went elsewhere, and we're just it's just a kind of a state that has a heart for people, I think, and will actually work together. I don't know if it's a Scandinavian or the German or what kind of influence it is back in our heritage, but the state kind of works very well together, and not only to do things, but to kind of do them right, and to fix them along the way. And that's why I remember when I was involved in the education community, when we go to national conferences, they go, "How do you do that? How do you make that work?" And I say, "Well, it didn't work when we started it, but it works now. We just kept working at it." And but Minnesota just has that kind of, we're going to get it right, and we're going to do it right, and we have a lot of bright people in the state that'll get it right. So.
and evaluate things and change them. Well, what is, in terms, and I should give another plug for the war stories, because they are great books, both Volume 1 and Volume 2, and for anybody who wants to get a sense of what it was like for a Minnesotan to serve in World War II and other conflicts. This is a
of
great
course,
publication.
I've been accused of glorifying war, and often when I am interviewed, about writing the books, they'll say, "Well, aren't you just glorifying war?" And I don't look at it that way. I look at it as these are me and you. These are common people who, like I say, they were working at the gas station, working, collecting tickets at the theater. They were doing this and they were doing that, and all of a sudden they're in the war. And and what kind of experiences did they go through? It's just a crucible of incredible experience for them, and they make great stories. Whether you, as Patton said, you did something, shoveling something down in Louisiana, or you actually went overseas and won a Medal of Honor. And we've got all those kind of stories in here. The Medal of Honor stories are in here. Here, I'll hold up the book. Okay. So if you want to get it, you can just go to our website, and it's www.mnlegion.org, and it's very. You can order it there, and we'll send it to you. If you can catch me somewhere, I'd actually be glad to sign it for you.
Very good. But there is a real personal element about what happened, because we all have our stories, as you mentioned. When you go in the military, you cut loose from Minnesota, you get trained, and you get deployed, and you come back a different person.
Exactly.
And it was quite as you mentioned, from World War II on, it was quite a change. Depression. Many of these individuals had never really done much traveling. They go halfway around the world during that conflict and come back, and then they feel the post-war boom.
Yeah, yeah. It's one thing I want to mention is, if you have a friend who's 90 years old, man or woman, the one distinguishing thing that you can say about people in that generation is not that they were great or anything like that. It's their sense of humor. That generation has, and I think because of the circumstances of growing up and then going through a war and then going through a boom, and I don't know, but these people have a incredible sense of humor. It's just they see life with with kind of a, there's a little cynicism in there and a little joy and a little of everything, but they really have a great sense of humor, and I hope some of that came out in these stories too.
Well, they are survivors,
yeah.
And it certainly tells us a bit about who we are, knowing where we came from and the experiences that these veterans shared. Well, we need to wrap up here, and I want to thank you, Al, for sharing your experiences as editor Legionnaire, as an author, and informing our audience.
Great to be here. Thanks very much.
Very
Bill.
good. Thank you, Al.